As oil prices crashed, our GDP started crashing too. Now, by 1990, or let me say by 1989, GDP was just 44 billion. That was just 27% of what it was in 1981. And then by 1993, it was just 27 billion, just 16% of what it was in 1981. And as all this were going on, what was happening? Population was increasing. So we were all getting poorer in per capita income. Next slide, please. So you can see, even today, the Nigerian GDP per capita of 1981 is higher than where we are today. So that means that in 43 years, right, we're now poorer than we were in 1981. And congratulations. Even as you celebrate 64 years of independence, our currency has devalued by 273,000% between 1981 and now. A currency was once stronger than in 1981. So please put back the slides. So you see, go forward, please. Go forward. Okay, stop here. You see, petrodollars is quick and easy money, but dangerous in the hands of men without vision. Note that I did not use the word leaders. Why? A leader builds and plans for the future generations. But men who find themselves in the position of power without a vision amass wealth for themselves at the expense of future generation. This is Singapore. I'll take a cue from Lee Kuan Yew. When Lee Kuan Yew became Prime Minister of Singapore, he said I had two choices. Either to put my family on Forbes list or to move Singapore from a third world to a first world country. Now, this is Singapore export. And when he was transforming Singapore, he put down a policy. He said scarce forex was only meant for three things. One, medicines and drugs. That means you have to be what? Healthy at all times. Two, raw materials. And three, machineries. So the mindset of who? Lee Kuan Yew was that go and import the raw materials, import the machineries, turn them to finished goods, and export to the world. Go back to that slide. Today, Singapore is not as big as Lekki Peninsula. Singapore is 728 square kilometers. The Lekki Peninsula is about 755 square kilometers. Singapore exported $925.95 billion US of goods and services in 2022. The whole of sub-Saharan Africa, 1.35 billion people, 23 million square kilometers, 1.35 billion people only exported what? 529.72 billion. We need visionary leaders. Next slide, please. So, I am going to demonstrate how your crude oil, this is the second part. The first part was how we got to where we are, right? Now, sorry, yeah, go back. Okay, stop here. Now, the Gulf War of 1990 saw us rise again. The Gulf War of 2003 to 2011. Go back, please. Go back. No, go back one step. Go back. Stop here. So when you see all this growth, right? Anywhere you see all those growths, you see from GDP of 2005, right? Now, crude oil, our GDP did not measure up for 23 years. The same thing when you look at the crude oil prices. It wasn't until 2004, during the Gulf War, right, that we matched, go back one step, that, you see, the Gulf War of 2004 matched the what? The price of crude oil in 1980. So that was when we were able to surpass the GDP of 1981. And then we also had what? The Arab Spring. And then the latest one is what? The Ukraine-Russia war. We cannot continue to kneel down in the morning and be praying for what? For one war before we have economic growth. So I'm going to say this, that Mr. President should move us away from an oil-dependent economy and invest in other sectors. Pass policies that can what? That can increase and enforce local production. And you and I must be also aligned to use those products. Go forward, please. Okay, we're here. Now, I'll need someone from the crowd because I need to do some demonstration, right? In the 80s, the World Bank found out that GDPs were increasing around the world. And the World Bank said, oh, they were good things. But what was driving the growth, they did not know. So they went back to the drawing board and found out that a lot of countries were what? Were selling their mineral resources and then just spending. So the World Bank said, okay, we need to re-strategize. That these things that these people are selling is supposed to be part of their total wealth. If they are selling this and then converting it to cash and selling, and spending, and GDP is increasing, so the World Bank went back to the drawing table and classified all assets into 4 broad categories: produced capital, human capital, natural capital, net foreign assets. Your produced capital is basically your infrastructure, your manufacturing, blah, blah, blah. Then the human capital is you and I, innovation. Natural capital was divided into two broad categories: reproducible and non-reproducible. The reproducible being that things that you can what? Replace. For instance, if you have deforestation, you can do what? Afforestation, right? Good. Now, if you deplete the fisheries in a lake, you can raise fingerlings, right? And put them back. You have what? You have restocked, so you're richer, right? But your gold, your crude oil, your tin, your gas, the ones you mine, you can't what? Replace them. And then your net foreign assets are your foreign direct investments, your sovereign wealth fund, your FDIs. So, when we looked at that of Nigeria, as of 2012, because the World Bank publishes what is called the Wealth of Nations. So every 5 or 6 years, they publish another one. The last one I saw was in 2018, and it was called The Changing Wealth of Nations. So what they actually do, because it's like portfolio investments, you might decide to invest in land this year. Next year, you might decide to invest in farming. Next year, you might invest in properties. So they change over time. And then, the World Bank gave us a formula, your net adjusted savings, which equals net national savings. That is what you already have. Plus what? Education expenditure. Minus energy depletion. Minus mineral depletion. Minus net forest depletion. Minus damages from carbon dioxide emissions, and minus damages from what? Particulate emissions. So, each time you mine this, I need an accountant. And before you come out, know your onions so that ICANN does not withdraw your license. Oh yeah, come. Okay. Human capital accounted for 54 point something, approximately 55. Natural capital came to about 10%. 34% thereabout, and then net foreign, 34%, yeah. Net foreign asset came to about -9, and -0.9, which is -1%. This is your crude oil. You have about 37.5 billion barrels of crude in your reserve, right? So, I am Nigeria. I am selling the crude. This is my foreign buyer. So I sell 1.35. Thank you. I sell 1.35 million barrels to him on a daily basis. Each time I sell to him, take the money. Okay. Pay me for this crude oil. So you are the buyer now, right? You have paid me for this. Have I made money? Good. So I shouldn't have answered that question for you. Now, remember, I said this asset is part of my total wealth, right? So I have depleted the asset by what? 1.3 million barrels that day, which he paid me for, right? Now, the question again is, have I made money? Why?
Because it's still the same contribution of your wealth.
Good. So, basically, what you have done, you only converted your crude oil to current assets, liquid cash. You have not made money. What you do with this now determines whether you get richer or you are going to get poorer. Right? So this was why it is easy. Two countries, a lot of mineral resources, they are going to account for what? 50% of 40% of the total number of people living in extreme poverty. So what we are basically doing is we are running what is called an asset depletion economy, where you deplete your asset, you use it to fund your what? Your expenditure. Now, go to the next slide, please. So according to the World Bank, natural resources give rise to economic rents because they are not produced. Rent from non-renewable resources, fossil fuels and what? And minerals, as well as rent from overharvesting of forests, indicate the liquidation of a country's capital stock. When countries use such rents to support current consumption, rather than to invest in new capital to replace what is being used up, they are in effect borrowing against their what? Their future. So each time you mine this is crude oil, right? Each time, why are you laughing? I did that on purpose so that DSS don't come and carry me tomorrow morning. Say, where did I get the crude oil from? So when you do that, right? When you do that, if I don't die before tomorrow morning, if I don't die before tomorrow morning, I can make a case, right? So when you do that, when you mine your crude, based on what the World Bank has told us, you are only what? Borrowing that money. I give you, let me bring it down to a layman's understanding. Your father says, oh, I am 90. I want to divide up my wealth. Before I say that, let me explain something. So what the World Bank is telling us is that when you sell this thing, invest in other what? Good, other sectors. So that what you have depleted, you will make returns, right? From those other sectors that will cover the liability. Go back one slide. Your net worth is your what? Asset minus your liability, right? This is how we are getting poorer as a nation. And it will continue until they change the economic model. Nigeria's economic model was not designed to create wealth. It's an economic model that impoverishes the people. It's simple accounting. Simple accounting and finance. So let me bring it down again. Your father says, I'll give you 10 houses because I don't want you all to fight over my estate when I'm gone. So you got 10 houses. Each of those 10 houses is what? 100 million naira each. On paper, you're already worth what? 1 billion, right? Good, as asset. But you now take Mr. A, who now say, what today? He now takes one house, sells one house, and then that 100 million, he grabs it. He jets off to Europe with his family. They go to Milan. They go to France. They start to shop. They visit London. From London, they jet off to the Caribbeans. And he puts all his photos on what? On social media. He comes back and then he changes his car. your neighbors would think you have arrived, right? On paper, are you richer or you're poorer? You're poorer. That's exactly what Nigeria is doing. This was why in 2012, the then sitting president said, oh, we were making progress. Economy was growing. It was crude oil that was powering the economy. You understand? So he said, oh, go to Abuja. You will see private jets parked on the tarmac. See, that's the mentality. These people don't know their right from their left. So you now come back. The financial institutions tell you, invest 60% or 70% in other sectors so that it will give you a return of 130 million, right? When you get 130 million, you are now worth $1,030 million, right? But you now say, how am I going to leave them alone? I beg, invest the 20 million. You now go and invest 20 million. It now gives you what? 20 million in return. You are now worth 940 what? 40 million. So it doesn't take rocket science. The only thing is that you need to understand the accounting, you need to understand the finance, you need to understand developmental economics, and you also need to understand some form of mineral resource economics to be able to put and connect the dots. It will only take you, it will take anybody if they crunch the numbers to say, oh, by X number of years, you're going to run out of cash. That's the case of Nigeria. So, let's go on, please. Next slide. You see, this supports, this was not my data, it's from MBS. While we had growth of 6.37% between 2004 and 2010, to even 2012, but we were still what? Recording poverty. Poverty increased from 2004 from 66.7 million people to 112.47. So it only shows the more mineral resources you sell and you are not what? You are not reinvesting, the more your net worth is reducing. And they divide it by your population. So they know, it took me years of constant data mining and comparing to all countries to know this. Next slide, please. So, what should we invest in? If you go back to that formula, it says what? Plus education expenditure. Next slide, please. Wow. Okay. Now, plus education expenditure, but look at what we're investing in education. Education is an investment. It's not an expense. Nigeria, I've compared Nigeria with almost all the countries of the world. But guess what? Nigeria only invests 0.8% of GNI every year in education, which goes to support what Mr. Omole was saying, Dr. Omole was saying. Some people are deliberately keeping you in absolute illiteracy. And they do not understand the consequences, the overall consequences on the economy. And I also compared Nigeria to other regions of the world. If you go to CIA Fact Book, it documents the profile of every country. On that of Nigeria, you will see under education, you see 196 over 196. What it tells you is that we invest the least in education in the world. Next slide. So when you look at this, look, this is the Conferry study on human capital value. So I'm saying this to the president. Invest in the people to what? To unleash the potentials of the economy. Even with the United States, with all these razzmatazz, with all this infrastructure, the people are still the most valuable. The same thing in Brazil, South Africa, France, around the world. The people are the major wealth of the country. And it only makes sense for you to invest in what gives you the highest returns. Next slide, please. This is the poverty clock. So I'll be rounding up now. This is the poverty clock. When you look at Africa, you look at sub-Saharan Africa, you find out that sub-Saharan Africa has what? Has the highest number of what? Extreme poverty. Why? Because South of Africa, right? The sub-Saharan Africa is a mineral resource economy. So it goes to tell you that mineral resources is not what? It's not the wealth. And then I did, next slide please. I compared Nigeria and Pakistan. You will see here that we are ahead of Pakistan in everything. But what is Pakistan doing? Pakistan has a combined trade deficit of 290 billion. We even only have 137. But guess what? We are depleting, if you look at total resources rent as a percentage of GDP, ours is 11.2. Pakistan is only depleting 1.59%. Adjusted savings on education, ours is what? 0.8. Pakistan is investing 2.04. So they are doing more. And bring out your phone and Google this. Pakistan plants 1.5 billion trees. Trees are a major source of wealth. If you plant rosewood, for instance, a rosewood at nursery stage may cost between $2 to $5. But when it matures, right, it's about $3,200 in the international market. So if I plant 1.5 billion trees and leave them for like 10 years, at every stage at which they are growing, I am adding to my what? To my assets. So that is it. That is what Pakistan is doing. But yet, we are more glamorous. We have more. We look like we have more, right? Because of our lifestyle. But Pakistan is far wealthier. And if you look at that poverty clock, Pakistan is projected, please, one slide back. Pakistan is projected to meet the Millennium Development Goals. Pakistan is in green. They will eradicate extreme poverty by 2030. On my final note, the next slide, please. I'll just take 2 minutes on this. Nigeria is a mineral resource rich country, but a fiscal poor country. When you look at our budget, between 2014 and 2021, we only averaged 29.04 billion. On comparison purposes, South Africa, budget annually, the last budget I analyzed was 136.6 billion, 2022-2023 national budget. Their education alone was 27 billion, and health was 16.4 billion. But when you have this kind of small, meager income, what do? You should invest majority part of it, right, to give you returns that can lift people out of poverty. But we're not doing that. Rather, we run a 70% recurrent expenditure and a 25 to 30% capital expenditure. It cannot get us out of poverty. It's not possible. Poverty will continue to reinforce itself. And leaving you with this, Nigeria is already in what is called the poverty trap. And one major issue we need to be looking at is this. The destinies of the haves is intrinsically linked with the destinies of the have-nothings at all. Whatever happens to the poor man, those poor people we neglect, it will come back to haunt us. And if we do not take care of them, we will not have a peaceful country like we have now. Things will only get worse. Thank you, and happy independence.